Hello, everyone. Mark Wiley here. I'm one of the elders here at Redeemer. I also serve on staff as one of the pastors. And on behalf of the elders, I want to share with you an initiative that we're getting ready to undertake as a church that we're very excited about. But before I get into that, I want to start with reminding us of the mission of our church. Our mission has always been to glorify God by making disciples. And that's been the mission since the day we launched 10 years ago. And we define a disciple as someone who worships Christ, walks with Christ, works for Christ, and witnesses about Christ. And we call that living the 4W life. And the reason we've termed it that way is because we want to remind all of our people that we're called to live that out 24/7, where we work, where we live, and where we play, not just what we do on a Sunday morning. That's why we call it living out the 4W life. And then we also, if you've attended here anytime, you know that we end every service with the benediction, "You are loved and you are sent." And the purpose of that is to remind us all that as we leave church, we are leaving to live sent as disciples of Jesus Christ. And so as elders, we are convictional that we would continue to just embrace this culture of living sent. And to that end, we've set in 2026, one of our priorities is to continue to emphasize and encourage this sent culture. It's why we hosted our first Sent conference in January of this year. It's also why we've highlighted some local churches recently, churches that are doing good, great gospel work. And we've encouraged you, if you live in those areas, to attend those churches. One of them is Bargersville Bible down in Bargersville. One of them is Crossway Bible in Franklin. And of course, our church plants, Ascend and Doxa and The Rock. It's also why we want to continue as a church to live out our calling, to be a church that plants churches that plant churches. And it's also why we've called the building that we're in, we've called it Ascending Base. We've called it that from day one. And the purpose of calling it Ascending Base is to remind us that this facility that we meet in, it's not just a place where we can gather comfortably on a Sunday morning and have a nice place to be and a nice place for our kids and our young adults and our students. It's all of that, and we love it for that. But we call it Ascending Base to remind us that the primary purpose is to be a place where we gather together on Sundays to worship the Lord, to hear the preaching of the word, but then to be equipped to scatter and live as disciples. So we gather here in order to equip us to then scatter. And the Ascending Base has been an absolute blessing to us. I've loved this building. And as people continue to come to Redeemer, we are seeing new people come. And you've probably sensed that, especially if you attend first service, you can see we're starting to get full. And if you have kids in the kids ministry, you know the kids ministry is starting to get full, especially on first service. Well, in my role as executive pastor, one of the things I do is I measure things. It's just what I'm required to do. And so I track things like expenses and giving. I track attendance and I track facility utilization. And so based on the data that I track, it would suggest that we should begin to plan for and potentially even begin an expansion of the Ascending Base in order to accommodate that growth. And we've actually been thinking about that for some time. And as elders, we've been praying about that and seeking the Lord on that. And what I wanted to share with you is that as elders, even though the data would say that we need to be thinking about that, we just don't have peace about expanding the sending base at this time. We've always desired to be more about sending capacity than we are about seating capacity. And so as we consider the mission of the church, as we consider this desire to continue to live as a people who are sent, we're convictional that instead of investing financial resources to expand the facility and make it even more comfortable, the Lord is leading us instead to free up financial resources for future ministry opportunities that are consistent with the mission of our church. And the way we believe the Lord is calling us to free up those resources is through the elimination of the debt that remains on this facility. And we as elders, we feel as we are obedient to God to begin to eliminate this debt, we know that He's going to do immeasurably more than we could ever expect or plan or even imagine as we seek to be obedient to Him and freeing up these resources. Back when we first launched the church, the very first launch Sunday of our church, Brock preached a sermon from Ephesians 3:20-21, which says this: Now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work within us, to him be glory in the church and in Christ Jesus throughout all generations, forever and ever. Amen. And as we look back over the 10 years of the church, we've seen God do just that time and time again. A couple of examples that just come to mind. Who would have ever thought or even imagined that we would plant our very first church, Doxa Bible Church, in the middle of a global pandemic? In September of 2020 is when that church launched. And who would have ever imagined they would be in their own facility before we were in a facility as a church? Or who could have ever imagined that a public school corporation would come to us and offer to sell us 16 acres of land right off of an interstate highway, prime real estate, for a total of $10? Or who could have ever imagined that we as a church, as a 10-year-old church, would be actively partnering for disciple-making ministries in places like Harlem and Germany, in India, and East Africa? And that's all God working in ways that we couldn't have planned or imagined. Let me give you a recent example of how God is doing things immeasurably more than we could ask. After we as elders had made the decision that we wanted to begin to focus on debt reduction, a family in our church reached out to me to meet. And this was independent of the decision that we had made as elders. And they had an offer to match dollar for dollar all contributions toward the elimination of debt up to $1 million over 12 months. That's amazing. Like, we couldn't plan that. We couldn't imagine that. And so I wanted to share that with you, because what we want to do here over the next 12 months is this. The first thing is, elders, we're going to take $1.5 million from the cash reserves that we currently have as a church, and we're going to make a lump sum payment toward the debt, toward the reduction of the principal of the debt. And we plan to do that within the next month. Secondly, beginning in March, on a monthly basis, every dollar given to Redeemer above and beyond our operating expenses is going to be allocated directly to debt reduction. That means we're going to do this similar to what we do every December with To All Nations, except every month, every dollar above and beyond operating expenses is going to go straight to debt reduction. And then each of those dollars given to that are going to be matched by this anonymous donor. And as we get into this next 12 months, we're calling this initiative Immeasurably More. And we've decided to call it that because we can measure and we can give and we can track this, which we'll do all those things. But we know that God's going to do immeasurably more than we can plan or imagine as we free up resources to be used for ministry. And I want to share with you what some of the potential impact of this is financially. Right now, the debt that we have in this building is $6.2 million. And our total payoff time from now to the end of the loan is 22 years. So if we do nothing different, we will pay off the loan in 22 years. So if we apply this $1.5 million lump sum, and then we as a church are able to come together and raise another $1 million toward debt reduction that would then be matched, the impact of that is that we would save $4.5 million in interest payments over the course of this loan. That's an 85% reduction in the amount of interest that we would pay. And it also reduces the payoff time of that debt from 22 years down to 7 years. And that's assuming we make no other changes other than what we do over these next 12 months. And the additional benefit is, once we do free up the debt, whether that's in 7 years or 2 years or the end of this year, we free up $530,000 per year to now be used for ministry that's currently being used to service that debt as mortgage payments. And to give you an idea what $530,000 means to us, we could plant 2 churches annually for that amount of money. But again, that's me just trying to measure that. Again, I think what ultimately we know that God's going to do immeasurably more in and through his local church as we obediently seek to free up some of these financial resources. And so whether that's planting more churches, which we feel the Lord's calling us to do, whether that's strengthening and equipping more churches, whether that's seeking additional partnerships with disciple-making ministries locally and nationally and internationally. We don't know exactly what that's going to look like, but we're going to pursue pursue obedience and then watch him work in ways that we couldn't have even imagined. And so here's what we're asking for each of you. We're asking, first of all, that you would just pray that the Lord would generously give to reduce this debt and actually eliminate this debt. So pray to the Lord that we would just absolutely eliminate this debt. And then secondly, we're asking you to pray that how is the Lord leading you to give toward this? And again, we're not going to do pledge cards. We're not asking you to make, formal commitments. We're just asking you to seek the Lord. What is he calling you to give to Redeemer over the next 12 months to help us with this initiative? And then just to faithfully and obediently give what the Lord calls you to. And then, of course, continue to pray that the Lord would continue to do immeasurably more than we could ever ask or imagine, and all for his glory. So thanks for listening. We're excited about this, and you'll continue to hear more as we continue on throughout the next year. You are loved and you are sent.